We're going to get going here for our show. Our first topic is going to be what everybody's dealing with right now, COVID-19. It started in March, and it's really just been hampered a lot of pro and college teams and high school teams, especially throughout the year. So we'll start off first. And one thing, Brandon, that I've seen throughout the COVID-19 pandemic that's really affected sports is, teams can go on Zoom and they can go on virtual meetings like we're doing right now and try to talk about things and go over plays and different defensive sets and that sort of thing. But you really don't get a feel for teammates. You don't get a feel for where your players are going to be on the floor. If you're a quarterback, it's hard to get timing down with your receivers and even your offensive line without being in person in practice as much. And same thing in basketball. The defensive rotations or knowing where your teammate's going to be out on the floor has really been tough for a lot of high school, college, and pro teams that we've seen so far here in 2020. I mean, is that something that you've seen, Brandon, throughout the year?
Well, I think you really nailed it on the head there, Pat. And before I jump into that topic, I want to make sure that people, hey, send us a like, subscribe to the page, come back often, come back every week for the show because we're going to have different topics for you. But jumping into that topic, like I said, I think it really is the elephant in the room per se. How COVID has affected almost everything in our lives, including sports and how we've handled it. But I've truly been surprised with how college and professional sports have been able to handle it. I thought you'd see a lot more cancellations. I thought you'd see a lot more players that would be out on the COVID list. So I've been surprised with that, to be honest. But as far as the product that they've been putting out on the field and on the court, I think you have seen that. I think you've seen with the shortened preseason for both the NBA and the NFL, I think that has affected play. You're not probably going to see teams, especially in the NBA, really start to get into a flow until maybe the second half of the season. And I think that's going to affect everything. So if you're a fan, sure, that's going to be different the way you're going to be watching it. You might see some younger players getting a lot more time. I know I've seen Kevin Durant getting some early rest and some players that probably you wouldn't see resting 4 or 5 games into the season, but just because there's been no real preseason and we're kind of really just getting into the flow of playing a game right now, I think you're going to see a little bit more of that going forward, Pat.
No question, especially in the NBA because, you have the condensed schedule. They're playing 72 games, so it's 10 less, but it's condensed into a much shorter time frame than the normal 82-game schedule would normally be played in. And then, like you were talking about in the NBA, there was such a short offseason from the regular season, then the bubble, and then you had this almost maybe 2-month break, not even then. I mean, the draft in the NBA was November 18th, I think, was the draft in the NBA. So you had such a short turnaround for a lot of players, including rookies who were probably in training camp for 2 weeks, and then they started playing preseason games. So you're certainly going to see some fits and starts with a lot of these teams because of that. One thing I wanted to bring up, too, and I think this is particularly in football, but also in basketball as well, is because, some players or teams haven't had as many games or really any games that it's hard for some of those players to showcase their talents to get drafted into the pros. So if you look at even this upcoming NFL draft, a guy like Trey Lance, who coming into the season was going to be probably the 3rd quarterback taken in the NFL draft in 2021, he plays for North Dakota State, and they played 1 game this year in October, and that was it. And he played well in that game. But now NFL scouts have 1 game tape to look at in 2021. Of course, he played in 2020, but as a college football player, most players get better every single season. And I think he's at a disadvantage maybe even coming up in the draft because there's just a lack of tape on Trey Lance now. And you see guys like Zach Wilson and Mac Jones and some of the other quarterbacks coming up the board and actually leapfrogging him as far as mock drafts are concerned. And I do wonder if that's going to affect him because of the lack of games that he's been able to play this year.